On the morning of January 4th, 2023, in the office of a major international company in Washington, people are waiting for a woman who is never late. Her name is Anna Walshe. She is 39. She is a regional director at Tishman Speyer and the mother of 3 small boys. She doesn't show up. No call, no message. Her husband tells her colleagues over the phone that early on January 1st, he drove her to Logan Airport himself. A few hours later, it will turn out, there is no record of her anywhere. And a few days after that, investigators will open a laptop inside her home outside Boston and see a list of 30 search queries made on the night the country was ringing in the new year. This is the story of how a woman disappeared inside her own house, and how her digital trail ended up saying more than the man behind it ever wanted it to. December 31st, 2022. The small town of Cohasset on the Massachusetts coast. Number 727 on Chief Justice Cushing Highway. Outside, an ordinary suburban evening on the last day of the year. Inside, the family sits down for dinner. Brian Walshe stands by the stove, handling the food. Anna is hosting a guest, an old family friend named Jem Mutlu, who's dropped by to say happy holidays. Upstairs, the 3 boys are sleeping. The lights are on, the car is in the driveway, the Christmas tree is up. From the street, the house looks exactly like dozens of others along this long coastal road. The guest stays late. They talk, they eat, they say goodbye to the year. No arguing, no tension, at least not on the surface. Around 1:30 in the morning, already January 1st, 2023, Jem Mutlu is getting ready to leave. Anna walks him to the door. They say goodnight. The car pulls away from the house. This is the last documented moment Anna Walshe is seen alive. Not the last time anyone hears about her, not the last time her name comes up, the last time, physically. 3.5 days later, her colleagues in Washington will sound the alarm. That same day, police will arrive at the house. Within a week, her husband will be under arrest, charged with first-degree murder. For now, the lights are on inside, the street outside is empty, and the central question of this whole story fits into one narrow window, between the moment the guest left and the morning of the new year. What happened inside that house after Mutlu's car turned the corner? To understand what this family lost, you have to look at Anna herself. She was born in 1983 in Belgrade, then still the capital of Yugoslavia. Her maiden name was Ljubičić. In 2005, she moved to the United States. She started out in hospitality and climbed steadily: hotels, service management, corporate sales. By her early 30s, she was an experienced manager with a clear career trajectory. In 2020, she joined Mutlu Group, a Boston firm that handles commercial real estate and investments. That connection would play one more role in her life. Through Mutlu Group, Jem Mutlu, the same guest from New Year's Eve, came into her circle. In February 2022, Anna made a major step up. She moved to Tishman Speyer, an international real estate giant with offices around the world. Title: Regional General Manager. Territory: Washington. From that moment on, her life turned into a flight schedule. Monday through Thursday, the capital, meetings, clients, an office in one of the city's most expensive neighborhoods. Friday through Sunday, Cohasset, husband, house, children. Anna buys a townhouse in Washington for the work week. The realtor who walks her through that purchase is a man named William Fastow, a detail that won't surface for another 3 years, at trial. Back in Cohasset are Brian, whom she married in 2015, and the kids. In Belgrade, her older sister Alexandra Dmitrievich is waiting for news. On the outside, a successful immigrant woman for whom the American dream actually worked. Career on the rise, full house, kids, status. The last couple of years especially fast. None of her colleagues describe her as someone on the edge. They talk about her composure, discipline, ambition. The man who comes home to that same house, to that same bedroom every weekend, is moving in exactly the opposite direction. In January of 2023, Brian Walshe is 47. He's the son of a well-known Boston attorney who had died a few years earlier. Brian inherited a substantial fortune. We're talking millions. With a start like that, plenty of people would settle into a quiet, comfortable life. Brian chose a different road. In 2016, he steals 2 Andy Warhol paintings from the Shadows series from a longtime friend. He keeps the originals for himself. Then he finds an art dealer in Los Angeles, puts forgeries on eBay, copies made to order, and sells them off as the real thing. The deal brings in around $80,000. The buyer pretty quickly figures out he didn't get what he paid for and goes to the FBI. The investigation drags on for a few years. In April 2021, Brian Walshe cuts a deal with federal prosecutors, a guilty plea on 3 counts at once: wire fraud, interstate transportation of stolen goods, and a money laundering offense connected to the criminal proceeds. From that moment on, he is formally guilty. He's just waiting for sentencing. Sentencing in that case won't actually come down until February 2024. 37 months in prison, plus $475,000 in restitution. But that comes after his wife is already dead. At the turn of 2022 and 2023, Brian is in a very particular legal limbo. Guilt established, no prison yet, but prison is almost certainly ahead. For now, home confinement, probation check-ins, restricted movement. His wife is climbing the career ladder. Her husband is slowly sliding toward a cell. The contrast inside one house becomes nearly unbearable. The condition of the home confinement Brian Walshe is on, while awaiting federal sentencing, is an electronic monitor on his ankle. The kind of technology you know from the news and from movies. But not all monitors work the same way. The one Brian was wearing was a radio frequency-only model, no GPS. The principle is simple. There's a base station installed in the house. The bracelet is constantly communicating with that base over radio. If the signal is lost, the system registers that the person has left the zone. When it comes back, the system sees the return. What that kind of bracelet shows is home or not home. What it does not show is where exactly. Which direction the person went, how far away they got, whether they stopped at a store, at a dump, in another neighborhood. The system simply doesn't collect that information. The decision to use that specific model was made by the federal court when setting the conditions of home confinement. Why a man charged with art fraud doesn't get a GPS unit comes down to how the offense is classified. Wire fraud, dealing in stolen paintings, money manipulation, all of that falls into the non-violent category. For defendants like that, the standard practice is the simplest possible monitoring setup. GPS is usually reserved for cases where there's a risk of physical danger to other people, violent assaults, threats against witnesses, flight risks. Brian Walshe didn't fit any of those profiles. An art fraudster, an heir, no record of violence. On paper, a model candidate for light supervision. A few weeks later, that whole system of choices would land in the middle of a national conversation, because that home or not home window can fit just about any trip inside it. 40 minutes in a car, an hour, 2. To the system, all of it reads the same way. Home, signal present. As long as the person leaves and returns between the regular check-ins. An invisible corridor for invisible trips. On paper, supervision exists. In practice, it's almost an empty formality. 4 days before New Year's, the digital footprint inside the Walshe house starts looking unusual. On December 27, 2022, a query lands in the browser that's hard to write off as random. What's the best state to divorce for a man? Not how to save my marriage. Not family therapist. Not divorce and kids. A specific question about jurisdiction, with a slant toward the husband's side. Over the next 3 days, a series of similar searches. Washington state divorce laws, asset division rules, alimony terms. The queries stack into a logical chain. A person methodically working the same question from different angles. On the surface, the week looks completely standard. Holiday shopping, cooking, the house decorated for New Year's. Anna is working remotely from Cohasset, getting ready to go back into the office on January 4th. Her flights are already booked, her meetings are scheduled. Brian spends time with the family, runs errands. None of the neighbors, friends, or relatives notice anything alarming about his behavior. No fights, no breakdowns, no loud conversations. The digital layer of life and the visible layer drift apart. From the outside, an ordinary December in an ordinary family. From the search bar, a man preparing for something specific, and that something no longer looks like a passing thought about divorce. If anyone had glanced at the browser history at that moment, the story would have taken a very different turn. But nobody glances. The queries stay on the device, and the family doesn't see them. At the moment they're typed, those lines aren't evidence yet. They'll become evidence 3 weeks later, when police get access to the hardware. Outside, it's the last day of the year. Inside, dinner is being made. After that, the core of the case begins. 1:30 in the morning. The door closes. Inside the house, Anna, Brian, and 3 sleeping boys. According to the base station for the electronic bracelet, Brian is home, inside the signal zone. According to the town's cameras, nobody walks past the house. According to the cell carriers, Anna's phone is exactly where it should be, inside the house on Cushing Highway. For the next 3 hours, no living witnesses see anything. What happens between 1:30 and 5 in the morning gets pieced together later from indirect traces. 8 minutes before 5 in the morning, 4:52 a.m., on an iPad belonging to one of the sons, a search is typed in. 10 ways to dispose of a dead body if you really want to start a new life. 3 minutes later, the next query about how a body's condition changes over time. The searches are made from the child's device, not from Brian's own phone or laptop. That detail will matter later. Jurors will spend separate time on the question of why a child's iPad. Inside this short window, Anna disappears physically. No calls from her phone, no messages. No signs of her leaving the house on any of her devices. No movement on her husband's base station. The early morning hours of January 1st, 2023, inside that house, are described only through what got typed into a search bar. A few hours of routine time become the central window of the case. Prosecutors will later call the stretch between Mutlu leaving and the first search the key interval in the entire case. The defense will try to push back. Anyone could have made those searches, and they don't prove anything. The jury will go through every minute of that night on its own terms. By dawn on January 1st, something has already happened inside the house on Cushing Highway. The kids are asleep. Nobody is calling the wife. On the son's device, an open browser with a search history that will end up in case materials. Outside, a holiday morning in the Boston suburbs. In total, investigators will later log around 30 entries like that, made over those first days in January. Not 2, not 5, not 10. 30. It's not a flash. It's a methodical series stretched across 72 hours. The themes break into several layers. The first, practical, ways to conceal a body, and the time-related factors that go with that. The second layer, forensic, questions about preserving DNA, about identification from partial remains, from dental records. The third layer, instrumental, queries about suitable tools and about how to handle the disposal of waste. The fourth, legal. Can you be charged with murder without a body? And the fifth, domestic. Queries about cleaning the house and about the forensic methods police use to pick up exactly those kinds of traces. And the single most telling query, about inheritance. How long for someone to be missing to inherit? That one line is a short window straight into motive. Most of the queries are made from the son's iPad, the rest from other devices around the house. That creates a defense line. Technically, you can try to put different users behind a specific device, but the prosecution will assemble a chain. Timestamps, accounts, the home network, linked apps, correlation with physical movement on cameras, and that defense line will fall apart. At trial, one of the prosecutors will call the list a plan, written in the defendant's own hand. The defense will try to convince the jury it's just curiosity, impulsive clicks, bad taste, not proof. Jurors will look at the queries with their own eyes, right there in the courtroom. The list is built on an obvious logic. First the practical side, then the traces, then the tools, then the law, then the money. The digital trail becomes the central piece of evidence in the case before anything physical is even found. There is no body, but the search bar has already recorded intent. And those lines aren't going anywhere. They sit on Google's servers, and they can be pulled at any moment by an investigation. A few hours after the last search query, a man in a jacket walks into a Lowe's store in Rockland, Massachusetts. It's a hardware and home improvement chain. They sell everything from nails to cleaning supplies. Security camera footage shows the customer moving down the aisles and picking up a very specific set of items. Mops, cleaning products, a hammer, wire cutters. The receipt comes to $463. Payment, a credit card belonging to Brian Walshe's mother. The name on the card isn't his, and that'll later give investigators another link. The trip itself is a violation of home confinement. Under the formal terms, Brian doesn't have the right to move freely between towns and stores. But the base station in Cohasset doesn't track distance. As far as it's concerned, the person went away from home, and a few hours later came back home. What happened in between, the system has no idea. January 2nd, Another shopping run. Same area, same kind of items, same logic. Surveillance cameras at the apartments where Brian's mother lives, in Swampscott, catch a man unloading dark bags into the trash containers. Several trips, several bags. On January 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, trips are made from the house to the Peabody transfer station. It's a major waste processing facility, where tons of garbage from across the county get handled every day. Trucks pull in, dump their loads, and the waste goes into the general flow for sorting and disposal. Once an item is in that mass, within 24 hours it's nearly impossible to separate. It just dissolves into the overall volume. The logic of those trips will become clear to investigators later. Whatever ends up in the general waste flow is, for all practical purposes, gone. But one detail will work against the defendant. Investigators will show up at that transfer station with a request for specific dates and ask them to hold processing on specific loads. Some of the bags won't have made it into the final cycle yet. The whole time, in the probation system, Brian is logged as home. The trips to Rockland, Swampscott, and Peabody all show up on the base station as one single stretch outside the zone, with no details. The physical trail in the real world remains. Store cameras, dump cameras, a receipt, bags, digital control over his actual movement. None. The morning of January 4th, Washington, the Tishman Speyer office. The regional director isn't at her desk. That sticks out sharply from her usual routine. Anna Walshe doesn't miss important Mondays. Colleagues call her, text her. The phone doesn't answer. Assistants check email, bookings, internal systems. Nothing. By midday, the office realizes that genuinely nobody has seen or heard from her since the day before. They get in touch with the husband. They report her missing to the police in Cohasset and in Washington. Police arrive at the house on Cushing Highway. Brian Walshe meets them and tells a coherent story. Early on the morning of January 1st, he personally drove his wife to Logan Airport in Boston, where she was supposed to fly to Washington. After that, they were in touch for a while, and then the connection dropped. His version sounds plausible right up until the first round of fact-checking. That fact-checking takes a few hours. Tishman Speyer had its own corporate booking system. No tickets in her name. None of the airlines that handle the Boston to Washington route have any record of a passenger with her passport details. Logan terminal cameras don't show any figure that fits her description. Uber rides, taxis, airport shuttles, no trace. The airport story falls apart by the evening of January 4th. That same day, Brian is hit with his first charge, misleading police during an investigation. It's not murder yet, it's a procedural count. But the message is clear. They have stopped believing him. On January 8th, after several days of searches and on-scene work, Brian Walshe is arrested. On January 18th, the charges are reformulated. Misleading police is joined by first-degree murder and improper transport of human remains. The case officially shifts from a missing person into a murder without a body. From that moment on, the defense strategy starts building itself around the Latin phrase corpus delicti. In American criminal law, that concept requires proving the actual fact of the crime, not just the surrounding circumstances, but the event itself. In murder cases, that has traditionally meant the existence of a body. There is no body. The defense plans to lean on that all the way to the end. Without a body, calling this a murder is too much to ask of reasonable doubt. A tough, risky, but in principle established line in American trial practice. In parallel, the prosecution is working. Forensic teams continue what they had already started in the first days, collecting absolutely everything that can be collected. The main find, at the dump. Police arrive at the Peabody transfer station with a specific request. Show us the loads that came in along certain routes in early January. Part of the mass has already moved on to further processing. Part is still accessible. The investigative team, in protective gear, takes the bags apart almost centimeter by centimeter, sorting the contents into categories. Out of that overall volume, a dark list starts to emerge. Carpet fragments with biological material on them. Several tools, a hacksaw, a hatchet, cutting shears. A Tyvek protective suit, the white disposable coverall used in construction and chemical work. Men's work gloves. Pieces of the clothing Anna had been seen in on New Year's Eve. Her Apple Watch. Her Prada bag. A vaccination card issued in her name. Slippers. A pair of hunter rubber boots. Parallel work is going on inside the house on Cushing Highway. In the basement, biological traces with a positive DNA match to Anna. A broken knife with the same biological material on it. In the garage, similar findings. Forensic technicians document every square inch, photograph, take samples. Anna's DNA is identified on the hacksaw, on the carpet fragment, on a towel, on hair pulled out of the bags, on fabric from the protective suit. Dozens of independent comparisons, all run by the Massachusetts State Lab. The identification leaves no room for doubt. This is her biological material. Investigators reconstruct the picture from the findings, without aestheticizing the process, without releasing the graphic details. At press conferences, they use the same phrasing every time, a method of concealing the body. That language carries through to the trial. Out of dozens of separate objects, each one becomes a standalone piece of evidence on the indictment. Alongside the physical evidence and the DNA, another person is pulled into the investigation's field of view. The name William Fastow had not surfaced in the news before this story. A Washington realtor, specializing in high-end residential real estate. His clients are corporate executives with travel-heavy lives. One of those clients in 2022 is Anna Walshe, who needs a place to live during her work weeks in the capital. The transaction goes the standard way. Showings, negotiations, paperwork, closing on a townhouse. But what forms between Anna and William isn't just a professional connection. Their relationship moves past the boundaries of the deal and continues in parallel to her marriage. That's confirmed by messages, by meetings, by accounts from people who knew them both. Anna doesn't file for divorce, doesn't move out, doesn't make any public statements, but alongside the family facade, a separate line forms in her life. For investigators, that fact is the missing piece of motive. The series of searches about the best state for a man to divorce in, the careful study of asset division rules, the query about inheritance timelines after a disappearance, all of it starts sounding different once it's clear. Anna had another life running alongside her marriage. If she had a way out, a real one, emotionally backed up, then Brian, with a federal sentence hanging over him, had his own motive to shut that way out down. At trial, William Fastow is a key witness for the prosecution. He testifies on December 4th and 5th, 2025. He confirms the nature of the relationship and the fact that Anna had been considering a life without Brian and had discussed it with him. The defense tries to push back on the weight of that testimony. An emotional connection is not the same as an actual decision to divorce, and intentions are far from actions. But for the jury, the Fastow line provides what had been missing. A clear, human reason the night of December 31st into January 1st could have ended exactly the way it did. Motive rarely proves a crime on its own, but in a case with no body, every additional thread becomes critical. The prosecution lays that thread down next to the digital trail, next to the evidence from the dump, next to Brian's behavior in the first days of January. By the time of the trial, the prosecution isn't holding a scattering of guesses. It's holding a chain in which every link holds the next one. On November 18th, 2025, in Norfolk Superior Court, the courthouse in Norfolk County, Massachusetts, the Brian Walshe trial opens. Presiding, Judge Diane Frenier. For the prosecution, Lynn Beland and Greg Connor, prosecutors from District Attorney Michael Morrissey's office. For the defense, Tracy Minor, a well-known attorney who had previously represented the defense in the high-profile Michelle Carter case, the so-called texting suicide case. The name Minor is itself a signal to the press. The defense is going to be serious, technical, and ready to put forward unconventional arguments. Already in the early stage, Brian Walshe partially pleads guilty. On 2 counts, misleading police and improper transport of human remains, he agrees with the prosecution, which means he no longer contests part of the facts, that he lied, and that some of what was found at the dump is connected to the case. But on first-degree murder, no. On the main count, he holds his ground to the end. The prosecution flatly refuses to cut a deal without an admission to the murder. Lynn Beland states the position clearly. For the state, this case is about the taking of a life, and any reduction of the charges would be a betrayal of the victim. The defense puts its weight behind the root argument. No corpus delicti, no murder. Tracy Minor builds her line around the absence of a body. By her argument, without physical confirmation of death, all the rest of the evidence, search queries, dump finds, DNA, Fastow's testimony, is a stack of circumstantial material that doesn't add up to the required beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecution answers differently. A body is only one form of proof, and with enough other evidence, Massachusetts law allows for a conviction. And the central piece of that evidence is what the jurors look at themselves on December 2nd, 2025, right there in the courtroom. The list of 30 search queries is put up on a screen, one by one, with timestamps. The room listens as the prosecution reads out lines about tools, about decomposition, about inheritance. It's one of the heaviest moments of the trial. December 12th, closing arguments. Balan talks about the methodical nature of it, about a digital instruction manual written by the defendant himself. Minor, about the gaps, about how the chain isn't closed, about how without a body the jury cannot be allowed to take the final step. The case goes to deliberation. On December 15th, 2025, the jury comes back. They had deliberated for about 6 hours, spread across 2 days. For a case of this scale, that's a short stretch. The foreperson reads the verdict. Guilty on first-degree murder. Guilty of murder in the first degree. The jury also confirms guilt on the counts he had already conceded. In the courtroom, Anna's relatives, who had flown in from Serbia. Alexandra, her sister, listens to the decision through an interpreter. Silence, then the dry delivery of the foreperson's words. Brian Walshe sits without any visible reaction. December 18th, sentencing. Judge Diane Frenier takes her place and pronounces the formula that Massachusetts law sets directly for first-degree murder: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. To that, the judge adds 20 years on the count of improper transport of remains and 3 years on the count of misleading police. All terms, consecutive, not concurrent. In her statement, Judge Frenier uses a phrase that will hit the newswires the same day: barbaric and incomprehensible. It's a rare type of language to hear from an American bench. Judges usually stay completely restrained. Here, a direct assessment. After the sentencing, the victim's side gets to speak. Tishman Speyer and Mutlu Group issue formal statements about the loss of an employee, a corporate gesture that still means a little something to the family in Serbia. Alexandra Dmitrievich delivers a statement on behalf of the family, about her sister, about the road she had walked, about the fact that without a body, the family has no way to bury her under Serbian custom on home soil. In Massachusetts, after the case, public discussion picks back up around the practice of assigning electronic monitors without GPS to nonviolent federal defendants. Prosecutors and independent experts point out the same thing. The home or not home model that sat on Brian Walsh's ankle effectively gave him a freedom of movement his status was never supposed to allow. State probation gives no formal response, but the conversation moves up to the level of legislative proposals. Anna Walsh's body, as of the sentencing, has still not been found. Part of the evidence had moved on to further processing at the transfer station before investigators reached it. Part stayed in the general flow of waste and is, physically, no longer separable. That remains the central open wound of this case. Even after a first-degree conviction, Anna's family is broken for good. The case is closed by the court, but the family in Belgrade keeps living with an emptiness that no verdict, no list of evidence, no digital trail sitting on a search engine's servers can close. Justice in this story has been measured out to exactly the limit the law allows. What does not come back even after a life sentence.